Tom Packer is an honorary research fellow at University College London. He joins us now from London. Good to have you back with us, Tom. Trump's Asia tour is being framed as both a diplomatic and economic offensive. His approach so far has seen a mix of tariff threats with rapid deal making. But is that a sustainable long-term trade strategy or more of a political performance for his supporters back home?
I mean, I would be tempted to say neither. I don't think it's the world's best trade strategy. At some point, like America's a very powerful country, so you can get very strong concessions if you up the pressure. But at some point, you have to have a trading relationship that's fairly stable and sticks. Otherwise, people will get tired of you and try and make other arrangements. I also am not convinced it's that aimed at his supporters. If you look at the polling on this, cost of living, which was one of his strongest issues when he got elected president, is one of his worst issues. There's quite a bit of evidence the worst fall in his support was when he imposed these massive kind of summer of tariffs. And if you look, I think the evidence is quite strong that people who support Trump strongly generally do for other reasons, not for protectionist reasons. For a start, they are largely the same people who supported Mitt Romney and George Bush, who are pretty free trade. I would say neither. I think it represents a genuine conviction he has back to the 1980s that America is screwed by the existing trade network, trade structure, and a administration is quite uncertain as to what deals it will reach to replace that previous trade system.
All eyes will be on Trump's highly anticipated meeting with Xi Jinping in South Korea next. Trump says he's confident of striking a deal with China after the Kuala Lumpur talks. But how realistic is that, given the current tensions over tariffs and rare earth exports?
I think it's very unpredictable, but it is very realistic. Ultimately, America is obviously a very pluralistic political system, but ultimately Trump is like all the pressure on Trump is overwhelmingly to be less protectionist. Yes, there's a lot of China hawkery, but that gives him huge room because people dislike China enough they'll support very strong protectionism. But there's enough wary of a trade war that he can actually get a deal relatively easily. And of course, President Xi is notoriously extremely dominant within the current structure of China. I think there is room for that. I think Trump tends to care a lot about trading concessions and a bit less with some of the geostrategic stuff that concerns Xi. So one good example of that is TikTok, where President Trump, I think, is quite concerned to keep it going because he sees it as relatively pro-Trump. But there's overwhelming support in the United States for not having a Chinese-controlled company having such an important role in the media education of the young. I think the evidence is China is quite willing to concede on that, and that's why the TikTok company has actually been making concessions on that. So I think there's definitely room to set up a deal. Then there's every room for it to go wrong. And one question is, it may only last as long as Xi and Trump keep up with the deal or stay in power, which is not going to be forever. But I definitely would not be surprised to see a significant general agreement come out of this.
ASEAN leaders appeared receptive to Trump's message that the US is with them 100%. How does that compare with regional attitudes during previous US administrations? And do you think Southeast Asia really is buying into Trump's approach?
I think there was a lot. I think I would say on balance, there was a lot of what one might call taking the US for granted, of just assuming the US would always back them against China. And partly because by the 2000s, it was looking increasingly, particularly 2010s, like it was China versus US for world dominance. And Trump's uncertainty, Trump's comments on ungrateful allies has, I think, unnerved groups sufficiently that they then want reassurance, such as he's now given. I also think there was just a very strong bipartisan consensus in the United States that China is a very serious problem, that China cannot be allowed to dominate Asia. And obviously, if you're an Asian leader worried China is going to dominate you, that's quite good news. But there's always a certain level of unpredictability or perceived unpredictability with Trump, which I think is managing their reactions. And there's also a strong belief that Trump has to be flattered, has to be congratulated. Hence, this having him involved in the Cambodia-Thailand deal, which they're happy to go along with. I'm not sure it's the best thing for President Trump's reputation or the United States, but I think the leaders of most countries are willing to go along with it if they think it suits their own interests.
Okay, Tom Packer, we'll have to leave it there. Great to get your thoughts as always. Thank you.